It is Sunday, December 2nd, 1984, 11 o'clock at night. In Bhopal, India, a city of 1 million people, the winter wedding season is in full swing. Families have dressed in their finest clothes and gathered under bright lights to celebrate. Children have stayed up past their bedtime. The smell of jasmine and marigolds drifts through warm December air. In the neighborhood surrounding the Union Carbide pesticide plant on the northern edge of the city, families are returning home, bolting their doors against the winter cold, settling into bed. The city is asleep before midnight. At the Union Carbide plant, an operator notices something. A faint smell. A reading on a pressure gauge that is slightly higher than it should be. Tank 610, one of 3 underground steel tanks storing methyl isocyanate, the most reactive chemical in the plant, is showing pressure. He mentions it to his supervisor. The supervisor tells him to deal with it after the tea break. In the next 2 hours, while 1 million people sleep, 40 tons of methyl isocyanate will boil, rupture a steel tank, and pour into the night air over Bhopal. By morning, at least 3,000 people will be dead. By the end of the week, 8,000 more. The final count, disputed and suppressed for decades, is somewhere between 15,000 and 25,000 dead. 500,000 survivors will carry the damage in their lungs, their eyes, their blood, and the bodies of their children for the rest of their lives. This is the story of the Bhopal gas disaster, the worst industrial accident in human history, and the crime that the most powerful corporation in America was never made to answer for. To understand what happened in Bhopal, you first need to understand what Union Carbide was, and what it was doing there. Union Carbide Corporation was one of the largest chemical companies in the United States, headquartered in Danbury, Connecticut. Billions in annual revenue. A Fortune 500 titan. Its products were everywhere in American life: plastics, batteries, industrial chemicals. In 1969, Union Carbide built a pesticide plant in Bhopal through its Indian subsidiary, Union Carbide India Limited. The plant produced 7, a pesticide designed for the Indian agricultural market. The location made sense on paper. Bhopal sat at the center of India's rail network. Land was cheap, labor was cheaper. What Union Carbide did not account for, or chose not to account for, was what surrounded the plant. Bhopal in 1984 was a city of 1 million people, and it was dense. The plant sat on the northern edge of the city, and in the years since it had been built, shantytown neighborhoods had grown up directly against its perimeter fence. Thousands of families lived within 500 meters of the plant gates. Their homes were 1- and 2-room structures made of brick, wood, and corrugated tin. Their children played in the dirt yards beside them. The neighborhoods had no mains water supply. They had no sewage system. They had no hospital within walking distance. And they had absolutely no knowledge of what was being stored inside the plant beside them, because Union Carbide had never told them. In the early years, the plant imported methyl isocyanate, mic, in small quantities from Union Carbide's facilities in the United States. Mic is a colorless, odorless liquid that becomes a lethal gas the instant it meets air. It is so reactive that water causes it to boil explosively. It is so toxic that exposure to even a fraction of a percent in the air will destroy the lining of the lungs. Union Carbide knew this. Every safety manual the company produced treated mic storage as one of the highest possible hazard classifications. At the company's facility in Institute, West Virginia, mic was stored in quantities no larger than a few hundred gallons. In Bhopal, in 1984, Union Carbide was storing 40 tons of it, in underground tanks, beside a city of 1 million people. In 1982, a team of American safety engineers from Union Carbide headquarters conducted an audit of the Bhopal plant. They found 61 safety hazards. 30 of them were classified as critical. 11 were specifically in the methyl isocyanate storage and handling unit, the most dangerous part of the plant. The audit report warned, in writing, that a major toxic release was possible. The report was filed. The hazards were not fixed. By 1984, the Bhopal plant was in serious trouble. The Indian agricultural market had changed. Demand for 7 had dropped. The plant was operating at 1/4 of its production capacity. Union Carbide was considering shutting it down entirely or selling it. In the meantime, the company did what companies do when they want to reduce losses. They cut costs. The number of workers on each shift was cut in half. Safety training was reduced. The maintenance schedule was stretched. Equipment that should have been replaced was patched instead. The plant's refrigeration system, designed to keep the mic tanks cold, because cold mic is more stable, was switched off to save electricity. The scrubber system, designed to neutralize any accidental release of mic before it reached the air, had been out of service for weeks. The flare tower, a system designed to burn off any gas that escaped the scrubber, was also non-operational. The water curtain, a system of high-pressure hoses designed to knock down a gas cloud before it left the plant perimeter, was not powerful enough to reach the top of the tanks. Of the 6 safety systems designed specifically to contain a methyl isocyanate release, not one was fully operational on the night of December 2, 1984. Every single one had been allowed to degrade. Every single one had been sacrificed to the cost-cutting that turned a struggling plant into a catastrophe waiting for a trigger. The trigger came at approximately 11:30 p.m. The exact cause of what happened next has been disputed for 40 years. Union Carbide's official position, maintained to this day by Dow Chemical, which acquired the company in 2001, is that a disgruntled employee deliberately introduced water into tank 610, a deliberate act of sabotage by one rogue worker. The survivors of Bhopal, every independent investigation, and the evidence of the plant's own maintenance records tell a different story. Water entered tank 610 through a corroded pipe during a routine maintenance procedure. The pipe was corroded because maintenance had been deferred. The valve that should have blocked the water was leaking because it had not been replaced on schedule. The routine procedure was being performed by undertrained workers because the experienced operators had been laid off. Every step on the path to catastrophe was a cost-cutting decision made by Union Carbide management, in Connecticut and in Bhopal, over the course of years. It was not sabotage. It was the logical result of what happens when a company stores 40 tons of the most reactive chemical on Earth in a plant it has deliberately run into the ground to save money. At 11:30 p.m., water reached tank 610. Methyl isocyanate reacts with water violently. The reaction generates enormous heat, enormous pressure, and enormous quantities of toxic gas. The temperature inside tank 610 began to rise. The pressure began to build. The refrigeration system that should have kept it cold was switched off. The scrubber that should have neutralized the gas was not working. The flare that should have burned it off was not lit. The water curtain that should have contained it could not reach. At 12:30 a.m. on December 3, the pressure inside tank 610 ruptured the safety valve. 40 tons of methyl isocyanate erupted from the tank and rose into the cold December air above Bhopal. The gas cloud was dense. Heavier than air, it did not disperse upward into the sky. It flowed downward and outward, hugging the ground, rolling through the streets of the neighborhood south of the plant. It moved like fog. It was invisible. And it moved at the pace of the cold winter wind, slowly, quietly, into the places where 1 million people slept. The first symptom is burning eyes. Not itching, burning, as if someone is pressing hot metal against the corneas. The second symptom is the throat. Mic reacts instantly with the moisture in the mucous membranes, producing hydrogen cyanide and other compounds. The throat closes. The lungs fill with fluid. Breathing becomes impossible. Most people in the neighborhoods closest to the plant never woke up. They were found the next morning still in their beds, still in the positions they had been sleeping in, their bodies giving no sign of struggle. The gas had reached them before they could register it as danger. Those who did wake up woke to a world that had become impossible. A survivor named Rihanna described it this way: "When I opened the door, I saw many people on their feet coughing. No one could see well. The air was burning as if they were cooking chili peppers." Another survivor described waking at 12:30 a.m. to the sound of his baby coughing. He opened the door and the gas hit him in the face. He could not see. He grabbed his children and ran without knowing which direction he was running. The city's hospitals were overwhelmed within the hour. Hamidia Hospital, the main public hospital in Bhopal, had been built for 900 patients. Within hours of the gas release, more than 20,000 people were pressing against its gates. Doctors had no antidote. No one had told them what mic did to the human body in large doses because Union Carbide had classified its toxicological data as proprietary trade secrets. The doctors treated symptoms as best they could while their patients suffocated and went blind around them. In the neighborhoods closest to the plant, the scenes were unlike anything that had been seen in a modern city. People collapsed in the streets. Animals lay dead in their yards. A reporter who arrived before dawn described the roads leading south from the plant as carpeted with bodies. He said it looked like a battlefield, except that everyone was in their nightclothes. By dawn, 3,000 people were dead. By the end of the first week, 8,000. Across the affected neighborhoods, 1 in every 20 people who had been sleeping in their beds that night was dead. At the Union Carbide plant in Danbury, Connecticut, it was still December 2 when the phone rang. Warren Anderson, the chairman and chief executive officer of Union Carbide Corporation, received the news in the middle of the American night. 40 tons of mic released. Massive casualties. A catastrophe of historic scale. Anderson's response in the days that followed would define what Bhopal meant to the world, and what it meant to get away with it. First, Union Carbide's stock price. Within hours of news breaking on December 3, the company's share price began to fall. By December 11, it had dropped 12 points, wiping out 27% of the company's market value. Almost $1 billion. The company's first communications to the press focused on minimizing the death toll. They spoke of hundreds, when the true number was already in the thousands. Second, the legal exposure. Within weeks of the disaster, American lawyers had filed lawsuits against Union Carbide in the United States on behalf of Bhopal victims, asking for $15 billion and $20 billion respectively. The potential liability threatened to exceed the total value of the company. Union Carbide's lawyers went to work immediately, arguing that an American court had no jurisdiction over an accident in India. The cases should be heard in India, where the court system was slower, where the damages would be smaller, and where Union Carbide's American executives would not have to appear. Warren Anderson flew to Bhopal 4 days after the disaster. He was arrested on arrival, charged with culpable homicide not amounting to murder and 6 other criminal offenses. He was taken to the Union Carbide guest house and held under house arrest for 6 hours. Then the Indian government, under pressure that has never been fully explained, released him and asked him to leave the country within 24 hours. He flew home to Connecticut. He was never extradited. He never stood trial. He died in 2014 at the age of 92 in his retirement home in the Hamptons. His body was cremated. The location of his ashes was not disclosed. In 1989, after 5 years of litigation, the Indian Supreme Court brokered a settlement between the Indian government and Union Carbide. The company agreed to pay $470 million. The settlement was presented as a final and complete resolution of all legal claims arising from the disaster. $470 million for a disaster that killed between 15,000 and 25,000 people and injured 500,000 more. To understand what that number means, consider this. By 1989, Union Carbide had already set aside $2.2 billion to compensate American workers who had contracted asbestosis from Union Carbide asbestos products. American workers, $2.2 billion. For the people of Bhopal, the final individual settlements averaged between $300 and $500 per person. When the settlement was announced, Union Carbide's stock rose $2 per share. The market was relieved. The liability was closed. The company had survived. The survivors of Bhopal had not been consulted on the settlement. They were not parties to it. They found out when the Indian government told them. There is a number that Union Carbide, and later Dow Chemical, has never wanted the world to focus on. In 1984, Union Carbide stored 40 tons of methyl isocyanate in its plant in Bhopal. At its plant in Institute, West Virginia, the facility it considered the model for safe mic handling, the company stored a maximum of a few hundred gallons. The difference between a few hundred gallons and 40 tons is the difference between a manageable accident and the worst industrial disaster in human history. That difference was a business decision. It was cheaper to store mic in India in bulk than to manufacture it in smaller quantities and ship it. The cost savings were real. The risk was transferred to the people of Bhopal, who never agreed to bear it, and who were never told they were bearing it. In 1982, when Union Carbide's own auditors found 61 hazards at the Bhopal plant and warned of a possible major toxic release, the company had a choice: fix the plant, or accept the risk. The cost of fixing every critical hazard was, in the context of a Fortune 500 company, trivial. They chose not to fix it. They chose the cost savings. They chose Bhopal. The plant site was abandoned after the disaster. Union Carbide locked the gates, left the equipment inside, left the chemicals inside, and walked away. In the 1990s, when the company's legal liability appeared to be settled, they walked away for good. The plant still sits in North Bhopal today. The buildings are crumbling. The tanks that once held mic are rusted through. And the chemicals that Union Carbide left inside when it walked away have been leaching into the ground for 40 years. The soil around the plant is contaminated with mercury, lead, and organochlorines. The groundwater beneath the neighborhoods that surround it is poisoned. In 2004, the Indian Supreme Court ordered the state government to supply clean drinking water to Bhopal residents because the tap water was unsafe. In 2001, Dow Chemical acquired Union Carbide and inherited all of its assets worldwide. Bhopal's survivors argued that Dow had inherited Union Carbide's liabilities as well. Dow's position was clear and consistent. The 1989 settlement had closed all legal matters relating to Bhopal. Dow owed nothing. Dow was not responsible. Dow had not been there. In 2010, 26 years after the disaster, an Indian court convicted 7 former executives of Union Carbide India Limited of causing death by negligence. The maximum penalty under Indian law for this charge, 2 years in prison and a fine of approximately $2,000. All 7 were released on bail within hours of sentencing. None served a single day in prison. Warren Anderson, the American chief executive who had been charged with culpable homicide, had been living undisturbed in the Hamptons for 26 years. The survivors of Bhopal did not stop. For 40 years, they have marched. They have protested outside the Indian Parliament and the American Embassy. They have traveled to the United States to tell their story to lawmakers and students and anyone who would listen. Rashida B. and Kampa Devi Shukla, both survivors, both women who lost members of their families on the night of December 2, won the Goldman Environmental Prize in 2004, the Nobel Prize of Environmental Activism, for their decades of campaigning. In the summer of 2024, 2 survivors of the Bhopal disaster traveled to the United States on a tour of American cities. They were in their 60s. They had been fighting for justice for 40 years. They met with lawmakers. They met with environmental groups. They told their story in universities and community centers. Their message was the same message they had been delivering for 4 decades. What happened to us should never happen again. And unless corporations are held accountable for what they do, it will. The plant site in Bhopal has never been fully cleaned up. More than 120,000 people still suffer from ailments directly caused by the gas exposure. Respiratory disease, cancers, neurological disorders, and a generation of children born to gas-affected mothers who have inherited the damage, birth defects, developmental disorders, immune system failures, in bodies that had no contact with the gas but carry it anyway. The Sambhavna Trust Clinic in Bhopal treats gas-affected patients to this day, 40 years later, on donations from around the world. Because neither Union Carbide, nor Dow Chemical, nor the Indian government has funded adequate ongoing medical care for the 500,000 people who were poisoned on the night of December 2, 1984. On the grounds of the abandoned Union Carbide plant, there is a statue. It was placed there by the survivors. It shows a woman, one arm raised toward the sky, one arm wrapped around a child. Her eyes are closed. Her face carries the expression of someone who has been failed by everyone who had the power to help her. In Bhopal, they call it the statue of the gas victims. In Connecticut, in 2001, Dow Chemical issued a statement saying it had no liability for the events in Bhopal. In the Hamptons, in 2014, Warren Anderson died without ever standing trial. At the plant site in Bhopal, the toxic waste is still in the ground. In the neighborhood surrounding the plant, children are still being born with bodies that bear the signature of a night they were not alive to witness. There was no accident here. There was a decision to store 40 tons of the most dangerous chemical on Earth beside a city of 1 million people in a plant that its own engineers had declared unsafe, because it was cheaper than doing it right. There was a decision to cut every safety system, one by one, until none of them worked. There was a decision not to tell the people of Bhopal what was stored beside them, because telling them would have raised questions that Union Carbide did not want to answer. And when all of those decisions produced the worst industrial disaster in human history, there was a final decision, to settle cheaply, to walk away, and to make sure that no American executive ever had to stand in a courtroom and explain what they had chosen. The death toll of the Bhopal gas disaster is still rising. 15,000, 25,000, the children not yet counted. Not a single corporate executive spent a single night in prison. Remember Bhopal.